Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Firsties. As always, I want to start this episode by saying thanks to anyone, the person right now who's listening, watching, subscribing, doing all the things. I really do appreciate it. It means the absolute world to me. I recently did get some personal DMs, just a few, and they really meant a lot to me. It goes a long way. So continue to comment, subscribe, like, do all the things. Again, I really, really do appreciate that. And as always, please make sure you follow Firsties as firstiespod everywhere on socials to get our short clips and behind the scenes. Now we're done with that part. I'm so excited because I have one of my oldest friends. I was thinking about it like 10 plus years.
Yeah.
Which is insane. So I have Lina here, my girl. She actually is been watching my content since the first episode, which I really do appreciate. You've always just been in my corner, which I love you so much for that. We just really quickly, we know each other from middle school, high school. Really high school is when we solidified our sisterhood. And we've been friends ever since. Now we've experienced the ups and downs of life. You've moved away as well.
I did.
I went to go visit her as well. And I would say out of everyone in my life, you are one of the most wise. She's about to get uncomfortable. You are one of the, but really, actually, you are one of the most wise. And I go to you for specific advice because you're one of the gems in the world that you give advice as if you were me rather than if you were you, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
What would make sense for Mila, right? Me and one of our other a close friend, Chelsea, Catherine, could be going through the same exact thing, but you might actually alter your advice a little bit depending on who you're giving that advice to. And that really means a lot. It's not like a one size fits all. And I do think part of that comes from your experience in life. And you're always willing to share kind of what you've gone through in life. And it's always been, you've given insight as well. And so she actually reached out to me. She's always watches the podcast and was like, hey, I want to come on and talk about, we want this episode to be kind of about mental health. You're a huge mental health advocate. For sure. And we're going to talk at the end, but she does have her Open Heart Collective that she'll talk about later, which I'm really excited about. But I kind of want to talk about, because that's not something that we talk about in the Habesha culture or just first gen.
Yeah. I think a lot of different
culture.
Immigrant cultures don't really talk about it.
Also, what is it? It's not even they don't talk about it. They're like, what do you mean you don't feel what? What is that?
I know, right? It's you're depressed, but I escaped debt. What do you mean? You know, we left the communists. Why are you upset?
What? Why are you upset?
Yeah.
Right? And why are you coming to talk to me about it? Anyways, so I have some questions here lined up. And as always, guys, you'll see that we just kind of flow in conversation. And I essentially want this to be what we do this without the cameras and the mic, like always. So the one thing I want to talk about though is talking about our 10 plus year friendship. I literally lost count after I just had 10 plus, but I think it's more. Because I've known you since
it has to be more because first of all, I graduated 10 years ago, which
that's
is
what I'm saying.
Wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, it has to be
it has to be more. But I was
13.
Yeah,
14?
which is crazy. Yeah. I'll answer two, but I want to ask you, what do you think you've learned from our friendship and our sisterhood?
Oh my gosh.
Because here's the thing. The one thing, sorry to interrupt you, but remember when we would go off to college and you guys would visit me?
Yeah.
My college friends would be like, I'm sorry, how do you guys know each other? My junior year, and I'm like, oh, I've known them since middle. And they're like, that doesn't.
Right? No one
it just
gets
doesn't
it.
happen.
Yeah. No, that's definitely a really unique experience. I'm super lucky that I have friends that, I've had, like you said, we've been friends since high school. A lot of people lose touch with people. So I definitely think that's unique. What have I learned? Honestly, and it's funny because the huge ass introduction you just gave me, but I could say the same for you. I think that every friendship that you have serves a different purpose. I think every conversation or kind of conversations you can have with different friends, it's always going to be unique. And I always thought of you, especially throughout the college years where we were both changing and both growing, you were always someone where we could sit down and just have 2-3 hour conversations about the deepest shit, that's
every single time
below the surface level stuff, which is really nice. They always say look out for people that, when you talk to them, they fill your cup instead of take your energy. And I always felt recharged after our conversations for sure.
I feel like it's just no, you're amazing.
No, you're great.
because I did give you a really awesome intro, but I really do mean it seriously, I really do mean it. Yeah, I think I would second that. And I think something that when I was younger that I found very attractive was like having friends 15, 20 years, because that's all I saw my parents have. Like we have a million uncles and aunts and they're not actually blood related.
They're just childhood friends.
But actually, and I'm like, man, and they've gone through so much in the stories they've told me, so that I found that very attractive. So I wanted that. And then the reality of it is that like people move away, people have relationships. Like it's not because our relationship has changed in the sense of like you're not high school Lina, I'm not high school Mila. Yeah. Thank God.
Thank God.
Literally, thank God. Like who is she?
I'm not even freshman year of college, Lina.
I'm not even yesterday Mila. Like
right?
You know what I mean? Like it's always changing. And I know I've heard people like no one did anything wrong, they just grow apart. Yeah. And I'm glad that kind of our spiritual journey also, because I know me and you talk about that all the time, has led us together in the same direction, which is nice. Yeah, because that doesn't always happen.
And I do want to add, one of the things that I have also learned just from like watching you and your journey and like watching you become so comfortable in who you are as a person, like the going after your dreams thing has always been something that you've like been about. And I think like with all of and especially like as a first gen kid, like there's so much pressure to like go a certain route, become doctors, lawyers, whatever. And like,
we talk about that a lot on this episode.
Yeah. And I think we both felt that pressure, but like, whereas I think I spent a lot more time trying to conform to that, you very quickly getting into college were like, yeah, content creation is the thing I want to do. I'm going to shape my degree around it and I'm just going to fucking do it, which I think is dope.
Thank you. I really do appreciate it. It's tough. It's really tough, which is why I think what happened and why I started this podcast is because I was like, oh my God, I found this gem. I have to tell everybody. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And how it's not as scary. And I'm one of the lucky ones that have family and friends that support. It took a time with my family. But I leaned on you and Chelsea and Catherine, who were like, girl, do it. You know what I mean? I showed you ideas. I showed you the logo. I showed like literally from the idea in my head.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm so grateful for like the friendship that we have, because I leaned on you guys for a lot. Because let's be honest, right? So I think the reason why for us, our friends, and we have the same, are so important to us, because at a certain point in our life, I can only speak for myself. I could not go. I didn't feel like I could go to my family on certain things, because they wouldn't be able to understand. Yeah, they just wouldn't be understand. They're not bad people. They just wouldn't be able to understand.
Yeah, it's just not the same experience.
Yeah, yeah, and I just felt seen, heard, and understood with our friend group, and I know I'm very lucky to have that, especially in college when I had the feedback of, remember Mutaz would be like, what? I'm sorry, you since how long have you been? And I'm like later in the group. It's like some of our other friends have been since diapers. And I'm
yeah. Like for instance, I've known them since like they're in my third birthday
like,
home video.
It's crazy.
Like it's wild.
Yeah. So how lucky are we? Okay, there are some kind of like mental health questions that I wanted to ask you and see where the conversation goes. Now, we talk about the first gen experience and immigrant families. What do you think are some common misconceptions surrounding mental health issues within our immigrant families?
Yeah, it's funny because like misconception implies that you know something about it and like that there's a foundation to work off of, and like that's like no shade to the community, but like honestly I was thinking about this today. Yeah, I mean I was thinking about it today.
You're not even in the club.
Well, to be fair, like I just think it's so different because like I was thinking about how there's that like idea that like mental health or like depression or whatever is a luxury, and like I used to get really offended when people would say things like that in other cultures.
Yep.
But the truth is, like when I really think about it, I'm like, what they're saying is taking the time to care about my feelings and how I'm doing and like the pressures of life related to me is a luxury. And like for parents who had to come over or families who had to come over and like start a whole new life and didn't have access to that same care, yeah, it is a luxury to them. It's something that's a lot harder to attain. And so I always like want to give flowers to the fact that like our parents raised us in a way that we now have access to that care and we're able to go and do it for ourselves. Because obviously we wouldn't have it without them. But yeah, I definitely just think it's really just a lack of understanding, right? Yeah. Like I think, back in the day, and again, I don't know, I can't speak for like anyone's parents or anyone's like older generations, but I just feel like there wasn't as much acceptance or really even conversations around like, how are you feeling, right? How are you doing? How is X, Y, and Z affecting you? How are your stress levels? Like whatever it might be. So, you know, things like anxiety or depression, it's not that they don't exist. It's just that like people find ways, whether they're good or bad ways, to like cope with them on their own because they don't have another choice. You know, it's living in survival mode, which honestly a lot of people here, like Americans, do too.
Yeah.
It's just a different like degree, you know?
That's a really good point. I think which I also want to add is they just didn't have the vocabulary for it. It's kind of what you're saying.
Exactly, the
so
language.
Like they all felt it. Like back in like BC times, anxiety is not something new, but I think the environment is changing as far as being able to talk about it and stuff. Mm-hmm. So I could see on their end where they're like, I don't even know what you're feeling, and also like you're fed, you go to this school, you wear these like you're fine. I survived this to get you here, like and pipe down.
Yeah, and it's so funny because like just like a little thing that like I'll share, and I've told my dad this before too, is like when I got into college, when I transferred to UVA was when I first started having panic attacks. And like I'd always had anxiety. I'd always like, even as a kid, I would like lay in bed and think about worst case scenario, right? But you don't know what it is at that age. And so once I got into college and I started having actual physical panic attacks, I remember like trying to explain that to my dad and them just being so like, we don't understand. Like, what do you mean? Like, what's going on? And it's a kind of a weird thing. Like, hey, I feel like I'm having a heart attack, but I'm not having a heart attack. Like, how do you explain that? But it's funny because now looking back, I'm like, my dad's like one of the most anxious people I know. Like, he's always worrying, always like, you know what I mean? But it just, again, they just don't have the language for it. You might not understand what's happening in your own body. Like it just, all you know is like, hey, I am worried. I'm in this moment, and you're thinking it's because, you know, your daughter's out late or like, you know what I mean? But it's for some people, it's a lot deeper than that, but you just don't consider it.
Yeah. And also I feel as though if they grew up in more like tough times, all they know is that the terms I like to use is like all they know is the house to be on fire. Yeah, so if you come to them and they actually know the vocabulary and they say, that's what being
exactly. And I think like what you
pass
said,
the potatoes.
Yeah, like let's move on.
Yeah, like seriously,
for sure. And I think what you said about the house being on fire, like that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like that's, you know, like, and I've talked about this a lot. I'm starting to talk about it a lot on with my content, but like it's all about like I think every, you know, mental disorder or, you know, whatever you want to call it, like I don't necessarily know if I would even call them disorders anymore. I think they're very normal reactions of the nervous system to abnormal situations. So like that whole like house being on fire, like if you're stressed out because you know, can't pay your bills, or like normal financial stresses that we have even here, or like, you know, someone's sick or things like that, like those things put you into a certain state, and like it just completely dysregulates you, especially if you experience like trauma, you know, especially for like a prolonged amount of time. We know that the body's not supposed to handle like high stress, high cortisol for an extended period of time. We know that that leads to all these different like heart disease and diabetes and this and that. But as much of like the physical ailments that it leads to, it also leads to a lot of like anxiety, depression, yada, yada. So yeah, I think it's like not having an understanding, because even me, like I didn't even know my nervous system had anything to do with it until like a couple years ago, you know? So
you're just trying to do your best.
Yeah, like how do you heal something you don't even understand is happening?
Yeah. Damn, yeah, that's real. I was even thinking about like when I sit around the dinner table and you know my dad, and he shares stories and stuff like that, and I'm like, this man here, A+. The fact that you survived that, it's a miracle that you survived that. Do you know what I mean? When they tell like some real stories.
Yeah, of course.
And even though they're in their 50s and 60s now, like your body keeps count. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think as I got older, and I think because I'm seeing my parents get older, so that impacts me a certain way, that I'm just like, girl, they did the best that they could with the information that they had. I tell myself that every day.
Yeah,
they irk me every day.
It's honestly like I think one of the things that has like brought me closer to my parents and like other than moving out, other than moving across the country, has been just like having now this adult vision of like, oh man, like this is what you know had, and like you did so much better than like I would have done with the same resources, you know. And just understanding that, like, yeah, like you said, like they did the best with what they had. And it's the same for us, right? We look back on who we were a while back And I'm like, I don't know who she was or what she was doing.
Yeah, I'm like, I would never say hi to her. I'm joking.
Yeah, but like really, like I felt so much shame even in early adulthood, like looking back on early adulthood and being like, man, I can't believe I acted that way or I did these things.
Or I said that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like you feel that shame, but then you realize it's like I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. Like when you learn more, you do better.
Yeah, especially when you're in the survival mode for sure. Because that's the thing is that like whatever you're experiencing right now, whoever is listening, and I'm sure Lina can agree, like you really can't wrap your mind around what's happening because in the moment you're just surviving.
Yeah.
So it isn't until a year out, 2 year, 3 years, like, oh, that was not healthy or that was not how it's supposed to go. No, I'm just talking about family, about like relationships with friends, like whatever it is, a job environment, like all those things.
For sure.
Like it took me 2-3 years out to realize I worked for a narcissist at one point. You know what I mean? Like, oh, because now I'm in an environment where it is, I am heard and it is healthy and there are boundaries and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So I didn't know till I was out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be a scary place, but the blessing is that you're out of it and you're able to have a little bit more wisdom and experience. It's something that you've always talked about, but when you have that realization, it's kind of just like
yeah, especially like, you know, like we're even talking about like adult experiences. Like imagine all the things that not just like first gen kids, but any kid, like your childhood is like a pivotal time, right? Like that is when everything develops. It's when your brain develops. It's when your coping mechanisms develop. And like everyone,
that part.
Yeah, like I don't care what anyone says. Everyone has some form of trauma, big T or little t, you know? And so like what's trauma? It's just really high stress. Yeah. And so like when you go through such a young age, like learning whether it's like to numb out or whether it's like avoidance, distraction, whatever it is, whatever like coping skill you learn at that time, because as a kid, like you have no control over your environment. Your body literally just has to go into protection mode, which is exactly what the nervous system does. Like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And like those little habits that you form then are the habits you have to heal from later on in life. Like that's literally all healing is.
Yeah, that part. Yeah, it could be as little as like not being picked, the last person to get picked up. You know what I mean? That could be trauma. Like,
yeah,
you know what I mean?
I mean, honestly, it's funny because like the first time I was ever like quote unquote depressed, I was like 12 years old. And it sounds so silly now, honestly, looking back on it. But it was like true, like I shut down.
You were really going through,
It was over my grades. Like it was just like,
That's
I remember.
so relatable for our audience.
Yeah. And I'm sure our audience understands. Like I had been like the GT kid. They'd moved me around elementary schools. They took me to magnet schools. And like I always did really well in school. And that was like my whole identity. And I remember when we got to like 7th grade, I went to this like Lake Braddock. I was in the GT program and they had this math class and I'm not kidding you. Like they were doing like college level math and I was having a hard time. And I remember like getting a C, my very first C. I was like, oh my God, my life is over. Like I'm going to fail out of
quit now.
Yeah. I'm like, I might as well quit while I'm behind. Yeah. But yeah, I just remember and like love my parents. It's not their fault, but they were always used to me doing well. So me like bringing home bad grades, they didn't think that I was struggling. They just thought like, you're not trying hard enough, you know? And for like a kid that's like, this is the one thing I'm good at. And now I'm not good at it. Like that was enough. That was like,
oh my God, you're really speaking it. I mean, so many first gens could go through this and our identity is tied in our performance, which is not the most healthiest thing, but absolutely. Cause obviously my parents have unconditional love for me, but I noticed when they were clapping is when I gave them an A. So I was like, oh, this is how it works. Yeah. This is how Mila's loved. This is how I can get attention. Do you know what I mean? And the good attention. Because when I do not get the best grade, I'm also getting attention, but it's not the right.
It's not the right attention.
It's not the fun attention.
Yeah.
And that's so real. And that can I think part of the reason why I love this podcast is because it's allowing me to be still and not trying to go for the quick instant gratification, and that right now the podcast is growing the way it needs to grow, and it's not coming out with like 1 million views or whatever, and that would lie within my performance. So it's challenging me every single day, which is why I love it, because it's allowing me to like really look in the mirror honestly and fight my ego every single day. Because really that's part of ego, even if you're 6 years old or whatever. You know what I mean? Like being winning a volleyball match or winning a debate, or
it's
like
addicting, like
being
that,
on the
that
SGA, like leadership, whatever. Like
I always joke I have a praise kink now. I'm like, this is because of that.
That makes a lot of sense.
Every overachiever grows up to be an adult with a praise kink. I'm sorry.
Right, yeah. And I'm really learning that, I mean, quite literally everything comes from childhood. from childhood, like what we learned when we were a kid, or what we interpreted, right? Because that's the thing. It's like, that's never the intention of our parents, but that's how we interpreted it.
Yeah, and I think the idea that it's like someone's fault is its own thing too, right? Because like for all the stuff that like we may feel they didn't do right, like a lot worse was probably done, you know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is. But the great thing about being in our generation or being in the position that we're in now is just that, like you said, we have the opportunity. Like, we don't have to keep running. No one's chasing us. We can take a second and be like, oh, man, like, is this who I want to be? Are these the coping skills I want to take?
What a gift that is.
Yeah. Do I want to pass this on to my kids? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, we have that privilege, I think.
Yeah, and our parents didn't.
Yeah.
And their work. And
they still,
how hard they worked a lot. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Shout out to our parents. We're going to take a quick break, guys. We'll be back after these short messages. All right, guys, we are back. One thing I wanted to also touch on was that, do you ever feel as though you do, this really impacted me growing up as well, the comparative thing? Like my achievements and like, whether it's with my siblings or whatever, and this was all mental. No one else did this. This was all my doing. And then
mine, someone else did it.
Like, yeah. And then, well, actually, you're right. I'm learning now that like, if you tell you are not your thoughts. So if your brain is telling you something, somebody put that in you. Like, you're not born that way. That's actually very true. But also the comparative thing of like, if I were to share, like, hey, I feel this way or this way, like my mom would like be blinking at me like, and I'm just like, okay, you were swimming in 60 feet of water. I was swimming in 30. We are both still drowning.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that comparative thing.
For sure.
And then I do fall into it and be like, honestly, yeah, you're right. And then never allow myself to like really go through the emotions or really figure out like what is actually going on until I burn out or I break down or something. And that's also not healthy.
No, 100%. I think like one of the worst things that we do just as people in any culture is like we minimize our stuff, you know, because there's always going to be someone who has it, quote unquote worse, right? But like this isn't the oppression Olympics. Like there's room for everyone at the table, and I think like when you do that, you're just like you're pushing yourself further and further into ignoring your problems, ignoring like what you could be doing to grow, to be better, like whether that's spiritually, mentally, emotionally, whatever. Because like just because, two people experience something different doesn't make yours any less valid, right? Yeah. And I think it is hard, like when, like you said, when you have like family that's been through some really difficult things that you can't even comprehend ever being through, right?
Right.
I can't imagine like a government just like, not that this happened to my family, but like imagine like, kids in Ethiopia where like their homes can be taken or their stores can be, right now they're like bulldozing a bunch of stores like that people own. So yeah, there's certain things that like we'll never be able to imagine. But I also think like everything is relative and you can still feel a great amount of pain based on what you yourself are experiencing.
That's very true.
Yeah, and I think like when it comes to like comparison, I think I just learned about this recently that there's like a when you use it as a way to be grateful, I think it's not as harmful, right? Like it's a difference between being like, oh, I have it so good, I shouldn't be complaining, and like shaming yourself, and what we do where we're like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe, so-and-so went through this. I'm really grateful that like these are things that I don't have to experience. What I'm going through is also valid, but like I am also grateful that like I have X, Y, and Z, a roof over my head, water, food, whatever it might be,
Yeah. That's a good practice. Do you, talking about like kind of like comparison, but also being able to like empathize with people who are going through stuff or have sympathy as well, more like empathy. Like how has do you find that you are, as you're growing, that you're learning more about being empathetic with the people around you, the older generation in your family? Like what is empathy, what is that role in your life?
Yeah, so it's funny that you brought up like empathy and sympathy, because I always say like, and I think we all know this, but like empathy to me is like super important. I think the difference between empathy and sympathy is like sympathy is like, you know, you see someone struggling. Like there's a really great like YouTube video, I don't know what it's called, but like it's basically like this little character and he's down in a hole and like the guy above is like, oh, that sucks, I'm sorry. And like just keeps on walking, right? Yikes. And like empathy is like, you know, they put a ladder down, they get down in the hole with you and they're like, hey, I know we're not going through the same thing, but I'm here with you, like period, you know? And I think the thing that we lack a lot in the world today is empathy, the ability to see things from someone else's perspective, whether it's from ego, whether it's just ignorance, you know what I mean? Like, I would like to think that people don't have a lack of empathy just because they choose to. I think that life happens and things that happen in our lives, like, some people externalize that, and because they've been hurt, like, they think everyone else should just suck it up, you know what I mean? But for me, I think even since I was, like, a little kid, like, I have always been really sensitive to thoughts, feelings, like emotion. Like I feel like, you know, even when I walk in a room, I can tell if someone's like upset or not. Is that always healthy? No, sometimes it's giving codependent, but like,
and we're back.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, like I think it's just really important to check yourself and have humility and be like, hey, like, you know, just because I'm not going through something doesn't mean I can't see something from someone else's perspective and imagine what it would be like if I was, you know, going through that thing.
Now, you mentioned being sensitive. And while I was prepping for this episode, I saw from your Open Heart Collective page, which I'll tag in the description, go follow, how you were talking about how you're taking your power back on that. And I was thinking about how, like, I was also thinking about, like, oh, what were some, because you were told that when you were younger, right? You are having a normal response as a kid to something, and then people tell you that you're being sensitive or emotional. And that could be triggering because then you just feel like you're being weak or whatever, and that's not the case at all. And there is a difference between sensitive and being emotional. You know what I mean? Like, you could be sensitive, but you might not be emotional.
Yeah, for sure.
Because there's a difference, right? How were you able to, because I think this is something that a lot of first gens can learn, is that we do, although we go through certain stuff that maybe our other counterparts don't go through, there are certain things that we're now equipped with. Like I call them like superpowers. Do you know what I mean? An example I could give, and I even told you off camera, is that I'm able to kind of read a room, a temperature in a room. Like I could see at a bar, body language of two guys, if they're about to pop off in 2 seconds. That's something I learned from my family, just coming from a big family with a lot of music, food, fun, all the things. Like I was able to see the temperature of the room and know when it's appropriate to get out and dance and do this extra dance or like whatever the case is. Do you have any, talking about like your sensitivity and how you're taking that power back? First, I would like for you to share, if you feel comfortable, what was that journey like for you to take that power back? Because your video is very like matter of fact, like this is what I learned.
I had a minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
I love to talk more.
Yeah, and I love, absolutely. Yeah, and this is where you'll talk more. Yeah.
No, but okay, so like the whole sensitive thing, like I have been told I was sensitive since I was a kid, which is really funny because looking back on my life, I never talked about my feelings until I was like 19, until I was sitting in like a therapist's office, right? But I think what they meant by sensitive was like, you know, when you grow up in a house with like big personalities, like I was very quiet. I internalized a lot more than I like, you know, joined in on certain things. And but I think like you said, there's this connotation that like being sensitive is being weak, or it means that like you're not strong enough or that you're not going to be able to make it like in the real world, right? And
that's exactly it.
Yeah. And it was like such a shame thing. Like I hated it because I was like, basically like being sensitive is not being taken seriously. And that's completely false. Like I think, you know, when we're talking about like superpowers, I think for me, it's definitely reading the temperature of a room, but it's also like, this is going to sound so fucking conceited, but like, please. I think I'm really good at saying the right thing. Like, I think there are certain topics and certain kinds of, like, vulnerability or things that people will share with me, whether it's, like, something really heavy, like someone's, you know, dad passing away or, like, something tragic happening. And I think a lot of us, like, it can make us really uncomfortable, and we either don't want to talk about it or we don't know what to say, you know what I mean? And we shy away from it. And, like, that's one thing that I don't think I do or have ever done is like I don't shy away from difficult topics. And I think like it takes practice, right? I'm not always going to get it right, but I do that. And that's also feedback I've gotten from people of like, you know, thank you so much. Like I felt like I could share this with you and you were able to say like something that helped. I've said that too
so many times. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, it's again, that goes back to just like understanding like how people work, the psychology of it. I've always been really interested in like why people do the things they do, what causes certain behaviors. But it definitely translates, like, not even just like interpersonal relationships, like friends and family, but even in jobs. Like, I just got a new job, and when I was interviewing for it, you know, one of the things that they were like asking about, empathy came up, because it was like talking about their core values and this and that and accountability. Yeah. And they were like, oh, like, you know, I was talking about like empathy with boundaries, and they're like, well, how did you like come to, you know, view it that way or have this perspective? And the first thing out of my mouth was like, I was always a really sensitive kid. And like back in the day, I would have never called myself sensitive. It was like such a loaded word. But like here I was sitting there and being like, this is a strength, and this is why you should hire me, because in my sales career, in my profession, like, I can understand what the customer wants. I can understand what X, Y, and Z needs are. I can understand if what I present to you is making sense, and if I need to tailor my approach and how I communicate. Like, I just think like sensitivity and empathy and being able to pick up on, you know, what other people are feeling is
without
a really
them
powerful
verbalizing
thing.
it as
Exactly.
well. Yeah, that's the superpower. It's not what they're saying, but reading in between the lines.
Yep, exactly.
Excuse me.
And of course, like, there's always like the extreme to that, right? Like I was saying when I was like, oh, it's giving codependency. What I meant by that is like, there is such thing as like emotional monitoring where you're doing it too much, right? If someone tells you like, you know, if someone looks tired and you're like, oh my gosh, like what's wrong? Are you mad at me? And they're like, no, I'm fine. Like that's different. You know, like there's a time and a place where you have to take someone at their word and trust that like we're all adults to be honest. But I think that comes more from anxiety than like being able to just read what someone's feeling.
What a journey. Okay, girl. Okay. Do you have any other superpowers? From growing up? I'm trying to think if I have any. I'll tell you one where being the youngest in my family, not even the youngest in my siblings, but the youngest in my cousins. Sometimes at mahabas and like parties and stuff, I was the youngest by a certain amount of age, and I was able to practice like my imagination, if that makes sense.
Because you're playing alone?
Essentially sometimes. And then we were latchkey kids, which means like at times we didn't have a babysitter. We just came home and had to be responsible and like quiet and all the things when my parents were grinding. And being able to like read a book 4 or 5 times in a row and make it interesting every single time. And like that's why I was like, I remember when I was younger, like I want to be on that, and it was the TV. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or like I just thought it was really cool of just like I just want to have play pretend and stuff. So I think my imagination that yields in like media and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so
no, I love that. That's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that. Yeah, I mean, I think other than like perceiving people's, you know, expressions and stuff, I think I've also like growing up in that environment and even just like learning kind of how to like go against the grain, you know, with certain things. I think it's made me a lot more like courageous, like in showing up authentically and like showing up as myself, because I feel like, you know, and especially like with communication, I think communication has probably been the biggest thing, because culturally, like, I don't know if your family's like this, but most Abisha families I know, you just don't talk about certain things. Like, it's just like, you know, whether it's that like, oh, what will so-and-so say or what will so-and-so think? And this is a really common thing in the culture. Yeah. There's a lot of like focus on appearance and presentation. And like, I think because of that, once I got to an age where I found my voice, it was like, no one's going to shut me the fuck up, you know, like, and ever since then, it's just been like, you can think I'm weird, you can disagree with me, but this is how I feel and this is what I'm going to say. And I think I'm very opinionated because of that, because I had to be like, yo, I don't want to care about like what everyone else is doing right now.
For your Gen Zers out there, she's standing on business is what that means. Yeah. And I've seen that journey with you, and I'm still going through that as well. For me, and I'd love for you to share if you're comfortable, for me, that adjustment that I made has been from the relationship and the role that my faith has played in my life, or my spirituality and everything, and we'll get into that. Because once I've really figured out, and I'm 27 now, about to be 28, and still figuring ish out, that when I'm learning I'm what God intended me to be, there's no one else who could argue that. Yeah. And that's where my confidence comes from. Truly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Because when you're younger, we talk about superpowers. I thought, and I know that my parents were my superheroes, right? These are the people that literally are responsible for my survival. For sure. They're my caregivers, right? Yes. And for the most part, they made really great decisions for our life. So obviously I look to them for guidance. But at a certain point, there's a point where you're just like, I got it. And also I'm going to make mistakes and all those things. And then be like, no, I really know who I am now. Like, because as a baby of the family, I also allowed people to make decisions for myself until I hit a wall and I was genuinely miserable and a little and depressed as well. And I was like, I cannot live my life this way. I knew I was not born just to do this. Oh, heck no. Life is too short. A couple of serious things happen. Remind me again, life is too short. And so, like, reach for the stars and go for your dreams. And I think something me and you really bond over is life of purpose and service. You always talk about in that video I saw where you just said in Open Heart Collective, like, I just want to help people, which is so broad. And now you're able to figure out who you are. But for me, it really was my faith that when God tells me this is who you're supposed to be, no one else can argue that, even my parents. And I'm thankful that they support that. But go ahead.
No, I love
What's
that.
your role with your spirituality?
Yeah, so what you said, like, I just want to touch on what you said about, oh my God, ADHD. When you were talking about, like, people making decisions for you. So, yeah, like, I was not always confident at all. Like, this is, like, the past, like, 7 years, you know? But, like, I definitely think, especially when you grow up with parents that, like, love you and are protective in that way, or, like, you know, you can call it overprotective, but really it's coming from a place of love. They make decisions for you. You know, what school we're going to go to, you know, what job you should get, like, all of these different things. And you want to make them happy, you want to please them, and you never stop to think, like, is this something I'm good at, or is this something I will enjoy? And so I definitely, and I remember when I first started having to make decisions in college, when we were, like, out of the house, it was terrifying. I was, like, so scared to make a choice because I'm like, if I fuck up, I'm the one who made this choice. Like, no one else made it for me.
Oh my God, talk about it. Yes. Talk about it.
And it was hard for a long time. And I think I remember one of the turning points for me was I was sitting in my therapist's office, and she was like, I want you to make a list of all of the decisions that other people have made for you, and how they turned out, and I want you to make a list of all the decisions you've made for yourself and how they've turned out. First of all, it took me forever to think about, like, decisions I made for myself back in the day. But when I did that, like, when we did that little exercise, I was like, oh man, like, all of the decisions, like, I intuitively made for myself turned out well. Yeah. And I can't say the same for all the other ones. You know what I mean?
That part.
Yeah, like, I can't, you know, like, I had to pivot a few times in life, you know, for a reason.
You're really speaking it.
Yeah, and I think, like, you know, I love what you said about, like, faith. Like, I definitely believe in a higher power. The only reason, and I say God too, sometimes interchangeably, I think for me it's just, like, my idea of God is not the God in the Bible, but I definitely believe in a higher power. I believe in higher consciousness. I think we're all connected. And for me, you know, that I will quote scripture, though, that one phrase of, like, the kingdom of heaven is within you, that to me speaks to everything I believe about spirituality and intuition. And, like, I truly believe that, like, again, we are all connected to, like, a higher power, and that every one of us has a piece of that within us, right? It's that innate knowing of, like, and the whole, like, me wanting to help people. Like, I just knew that that's what I was here to do. I didn't exactly know how. I didn't know when.
I believe it too.
Yeah, and, like, life got in the way, and I thought, well, maybe I should just do this, or maybe I should just do that. But, like, it always came back to, like, no, this is the thing that, like, everything in my, like, soul is telling me to do. So, yeah, I think it definitely, like, I became spiritual for a lot of different reasons. I think, there was a point, I mean, I think we all go through different things, right? Like, there was a point in my life where, you know, we had lost a friend, and that made me believe, like, nothing existed. Like, there was no God, there was no religion, like, there was nothing. And, like, that was a couple years of that. And I think, again, as I got older, as, like, a lot of mental health stuff started coming up, as I started just, like, working on myself, I found, like, different practices and different things, like, whether it was, like, meditation, like, sitting still and, like, going inward and, you know, seeing what came up, and all these different things that I was practicing, that I was like, yeah, there's definitely something. Like, it's not, and even just, like, I don't believe in coincidences, right? Like, there's so many times in my life where at the time I might have been like, this is the worst thing ever. Like, you know, my abusive relationship, like, I won't go into, like, detail about it, but leaving that experience, like, as miserable as I was, leaving that experience changed my entire life for the better. So many good things came out of it. And it sounds weird, but I'm so grateful for that relationship, because there were so many things in life that, like, I needed to learn, and that was the only way I could have learned it. So looking back on that, and I remember leaving, like, there was, like, a voice in my head, and it was not my voice. Like, there are a few times in my life where I feel like my higher power is really talking to me directly, and that was definitely one of them. So I think that's kind of, like, where that spiritual connection started. And I just, like, as I started, like, healing and doing the work, I just had this, like, hunger to learn more and read more and, like, get more and more in touch with that.
Yeah. It sounds like you were getting on a frequency of your spirituality and stuff. Yeah. Now you spoke about your abusive relationship and how, of course, obviously we're not going to go into detail about it, but I do want to ask, what has that trauma taught you really about yourself? Even the fact that you left that.
Yeah. I think the best thing about that, there are some funny stories about that person. They were insane. But like, I think the best thing or the most important thing that I needed to learn at that time in my life was boundaries and self-love, right? Mm-hmm. Like those are the two big things. And everybody talks about self-love, but like, what does that actually mean? I remember being in that relationship and having the thought of like, I love this person so much. And I know that if I'm with them, I probably won't be very happy in life, but they'll be happy and that's enough. And like thinking about that now, like, ew, like why? Like, why'd you do that? But like, it's just like, it was insane to me. And like, I always thought, and this is so naive, but I truly thought that like everyone had good intentions. And so, you know, when he would do X, Y, and Z, I would be like, oh, it's because he wasn't loved as a child, or like, oh, it was because like X, Y, and Z happened. But like,
there's always an explanation.
Yeah, like we're not responsible for the stuff that happens as a kid, but you are absolutely responsible for how you choose to heal from that. Right. And it does not make it okay to make other people suffer because you've suffered. And so that was a big thing I had to learn. I had to learn that like some people really are trying to hurt you because of their own stuff, and I can have empathy for that, but also like empathy doesn't mean you take shit. You know what I mean? Like it still doesn't make it okay. And so I think the biggest thing I learned was like boundaries of like, look, I get that you're going through a hard time. And I used to think like going through a hard time was an excuse for everything. It's not. And that translated to me. Like there were things that I've done that I'm not proud of when I was going through a hard time. And like, you know, Mila, I've apologized to you for things that I did when I was going through a hard time. Like just because I was having a hard time doesn't make the things that I did okay. And I think like leaving that relationship and taking responsibility for not just what happened there, but with like myself as a person, like, I think I grew so much from that. And also there's something like for any woman that's been in any toxic or abusive relationship, like leaving, the confidence that comes from being like, I'm choosing myself and I don't actually need this person that I feel like I'm like addicted to. Like that in itself is its own spiritual journey. You know what I mean?
Damn. I'm always sitting back. Like I'm with you guys on the audience. I'm just like, that's why I want her on this podcast, because she can really just drop so many gems. It's amazing. It's literally one of your talents. It really is, like how you speak and everything. Yeah. No, but I'm gonna
be like, be confident. Don't talk about me.
Oh, that's hilarious. Okay, guys, we're gonna take a quick break. We'll be back after these short messages. Like 5 more minutes. All right, guys, we are back. Yeah, these lights can be hot, I know. So we really covered everything here. Now I kind of wanted to quickly to end this episode, I want to talk about what you're a content creator. Oh yeah. And you're finally doing it.
Oh god, that's such a big word. Capital C.
And you have Open Heart Collective. Yeah. So I want you to kind of talk about like how it started, because I know when I got the notification that you followed not obviously not you, but Open Heart Collective, and then you DM'd me on it as well, and I was so freaking excited. Because I think I'm the only one really. I mean, there's Matt as well, but like our friends that does like content creation, and now you're in it and you do so well. You're already doing so well at it. I really believe like any single time, and this is anyone who's listening, when you are at a moment and you feel as though like you're either not prepared for it or you have an idea to do it, I really feel like everything you've experienced, your trauma, your childhood, let you up for this exact moment. Like the fact that you're able to talk about your trauma and experiences and talk about how it led you to spirituality and mental health advocate, all the things, I think it's because of every little thing you went through. Some of those were tough, even as someone who loves you, was tough to even hear about it and support you through it. But it got me really excited, because I was just like, yeah, girl, like that's your superpower. Like, you know what I mean? Because it doesn't end at just trauma. Like I really, 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 really am obsessed with hearing people's experiences and being like, and this is how it turned into this. Because I just don't think our God is going to allow you to go through these things and then that's yeah. It's I really, really believe that, and I really get so excited about talking about it. So what made you start Open Heart Collective? Which again, I'll tag everything below. You guys will be able to follow it, but go ahead.
So it's funny because we, talking about spirituality, this is like, I knew I wanted to start sharing my story. I didn't know how. I knew I wanted to like make a career out of it eventually. And like, I wanted it to be I knew it was my life's purpose. But I just didn't know how. At first I thought maybe I would just do like public speaking or, be a therapist or like X, Y, and Z, write a book. I don't know. All things I could still do. But I
was like, girl,
there were these
that's
ideas.
just your bucket list.
There were ideas floating around my head. And I remember especially this last year. This last year was like pretty tough mental health wise, but I had moved across the country. It was a whole adjustment. And I just remember like I was in the research and like analysis paralysis stage for so long, like thinking even about starting content creation and like my niche and this and that. Cause there's like so many things that like, I was like looking at all these different Instagrams and I was like, maybe I'll do digital marketing. And it was just like, I was aware that I had all this nervous energy, but I was also aware that like I would have to do it eventually. And I remember one day when, I don't even remember what I was doing, but very randomly, that name, like Open Heart Collective, popped into my head. Like it was literally just like randomly popped in my head. And I remember I grabbed my phone and I wrote it down. I was like, I don't know what this is going to be, but whatever I'm going to do, this is going to be the name for it, And so it's something that like is still evolving now. But honestly, like when I created the page and I had the idea around like the kind of content that I want to release, it's really just, again, connected to like everything. I remember, when I was going through some of the hardest things in my life, I think part of what was so difficult about it was thinking that I was the only one going through it. And that like anyone I like had in my life, they were amazing, right? But like they're not necessarily experiencing the same things, or at least if they were, we weren't talking about it. And I think so many of us go through hard times and we think that we're the only ones who have been through it. And so the whole purpose of like, one of my reels the other day was literally just, it was like a quote with a background. And the quote was like, one day you'll share the story of everything you went through and how you overcame. It was like, you'll share the story of how you overcame everything you went through and it'll be someone else's survival guide. And like, that's a Brene Brown quote that just hits. Like, I love that because it's true. Like we all experience different things. And, I think it's like you said, the story doesn't stop at the trauma. I think it just starts at that. I think the story starts, with healing.
Yeah. It's your arc. It's just literally just like a movie.
Yeah.
Like, this is all. Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Congrats on that. That's so exciting. Thanks. I'm so excited to see where it goes. Is there anything else that you want to share? Oh, is there any, it's Firsties, right? Is there any feedback or advice that you want to give to Firsties out there who maybe is having a tough time or their mental health is not where it needs to be? What would you like to share?
Yes. I think it can be super isolating sometimes if you don't have people, in your life that fully get it. But my advice would be just don't invalidate yourself. What you're experiencing is actually happening, and there are people and resources and places you can go to get help. You just might have to look. And that's totally okay. Don't feel any shame in having to ask for help. No one goes through life alone. No one goes through healing alone. Like, we all heal in community. As humans, we're social creatures. And last thing, I am going to be releasing like an ebook with Open Heart Collective. Right now, it's a lot of content around like nervous system regulation and vulnerability and a lot of things that we've talked about here. That's also a thing that's coming April.
I did not know that. Learned that on this couch, and she's literally my best friend. We'll talk about that later. That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's like a real small ebook guide. Okay. So don't get excited. It's not like a chapter book, but
see, we try to troll back. No, talk about it. That's awesome. Congratulations, love. That is it for this episode, guys. Make sure you follow Lina and also make sure you follow Open Heart Collective. Again, I'll tag everything below in the description. And of course, please follow firstiespod. That's firstiespod everywhere on Snapchat, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, everywhere. You'll be able to get short clips and behind the scenes on TikTok and Instagram. That is it for this episode, guys. We'll see you in our next episode. Take care, guys.